chapter 13, talking about love as we continue looking at this table talk, this conversation that Jesus had with his closest companions in his last few hours. And I'd like to open with kind of acknowledging that that Christians have a PR problem. We have a public relations problem. It's a crisis, probably maybe up to epidemic levels. I think it's getting really, really bad. If you just kind of scroll, or you're looking through, or you're listening for the news, you kind of Google search Christians, the majority of stuff that comes up, pretty negative, okay? We've got a bit of a PR problem on our hands as Christ followers. You'll find lots of denominational arguments, just like churches arguing with churches about who's right and who's wrong and who's orthodox and who's unorthodox. It just kind of creates a confusing thing to the public, I think, seeing Christians argue with other Christians. But then you also see Christians arguing with everybody in the culture. We're pretty quick to jump in on culture wars and go to battle with people over all sorts of things. It feels like some days, like almost anything we'll fight with somebody in culture about. So we have Christians fighting with other Christians. We have Christians fighting with people in the culture. We also have this weird collusion happening with politics. Have you noticed this? Maybe heavier this year, 2024, as we get political agendas and other things kind of become more and more enmeshed with Christianity. It becomes hard to tell where one ends and another begins. We can go through even just individual scandals, okay? So if you look at some of the highest profile Christians, you kind of go and do a search of Christians that maybe have had a fall from grace, you would find that Christians on a regular basis, individuals, high profile Christians, struggle with sex, drugs, and rock and roll. I mean, there's all sorts of weird stuff that we find out about pastors and leaders and people that claim to follow Christ and the things that they do with regards to sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It almost seems like sometimes people see Christianity as a way to become famous. And so it becomes kind of like a weird Christian celebrity thing. We also see it not just individually, we see it also institutionally. And maybe we're more aware of these things, or maybe they're just getting better coverage these days than others. But Christians have been called, and rightfully so in many ways, Christians have been called racist, sexist, and capitalist. Racism, sexism, and capitalism run rampant through the institution that is the Christian church. Christians seem to have a PR problem. And I wonder today if the problem is with the publicity or if it's with the people. Is it just that the media is out to get Christians? Or is it that Christians keep giving the media stuff to report? Where's the problem today? I love, and some of us have talked about this, I love The Chosen. Great show. Really, really excited for the project, the way the project has come together and the things that it's done. I think in many ways, media like that helps Christians' PR. It kind of helps people see and exposes them to the gospel in a new way. I love the work that's happening there, but I have a fear. I have a fear that as Christians, we're more concerned with managing publicity than renewing people. We're more focused on content control than we are on character formation. We'd rather the media just cover the nice side of who we are. And if we could just somehow find a way to control all the stories that they tell about us, then maybe people would be attracted to Jesus. Then maybe people would be interested in church. Maybe there'd be one less hurdle that we have to jump over. I think we get so focused on controlling content that we forget the primary call of Christ is to connect with God and connect with people. In Jesus' most critical moment, he delivered the ultimate command. If you look at John chapter 13, verses 30 to 35, which is where we'll be today, you see that Jesus had just completed, he had just washed the disciples' feet. We talked about this last week. He had just served the disciples by washing their feet. And he says in the midst of that, he quotes Psalm 46, he says, somebody in this group is going to betray me. The one that I dip the bread with will betray me. And I think at that moment, I think Jesus is still sorting out. Some people in this debate, I think Jesus is still sorting out who in the room is it? Who's it going to be? He washes all their feet. He offers all of them the bread. And it says, as Judas dips the bread, I think that's when Jesus knows who it is. And he tells him, go and do what you've determined to do. And in verse 30 of John chapter 13, it says, after Judas had received the morsel of bread, he immediately went out, and it was night. Now at that moment, after Judas exits the upper room, Jesus does not know if he has 10 minutes before the authorities come in, or if he has hours before the authorities come in. And what happens next is, I think, the most critical thing that Jesus says in the midst of the entire upper room discourse, because the urgency now is higher than it's ever been. Who knows how long before Judas and the rabble, the crowd, comes back. It's the most critical moment. And he delivers the ultimate command. He delivers the command that will become the glue of the church. He delivers the command that will be the oil that greases the entire movement through the world. And this is what he says in John chapter 13, verse 34. Jesus says, a new command I give to you, that you love one another. Just as I have loved you, you also are to love one another. Now surely, Charlie, the complexity of our PR problem can't be so simply solved with love. Love one another. Love one another? Is that really the ultimate command? Like, of all the things that Jesus could have told them in the moments after Judas left the room, he says, love each other. He calls it a new command. The idea of commandments, the idea of an entire ethic was not unfamiliar to this group of Jewish men celebrating the Passover feast in this room. In fact, they had 613 commands that they would have been familiar with through their scriptures. And Jesus had already reframed a lot of those commands into 2 commandments, really. He had taken the 613 and he brought it down to 2, and he had said, when he was asked what's the most important commandment, he says to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That is the first and priority command, the greatest of all the commandments. It comes from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And every Jew in the world at that time would have been like, yeah, that's the one. That's Deuteronomy 6. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. But then Jesus says something else, because the second one is just like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is actually a pretty obscure command out of Leviticus chapter 19. And Jesus said that command is just like the first one. It's of the same importance as the first one. But here in John chapter 13, verse 34, he's giving them a new command. A new command. Jesus had already taken it from 613 down to 2, and now he's giving them a new command. Now, what was the purpose of all 613 of those Old Testament commands? They were there to set a people apart. They were the ethic by which a community of people would live that would mark them as distinct from the rest of the world. It would set them apart. In fact, if you go in through the Old Testament, you see the prophets and other people talk about it. It wasn't just about being separate. It wasn't just about being a holy people, a people set apart, a people consecrated. It was also about preserving a people. It was the means of preservation. Obedience to these ethics would save and keep people blessed through the challenges of life. It was a system in which they could invite people in. It was setting them apart. It was preserving them. It was a way in which people could be invited into the community. And it was a way of pointing forward. It was a way of pointing to a kingdom that was to come. Most of the 613 laws were vertically oriented. They emphasized humanity's relationship to God. Especially if you look at the book of Leviticus, which if any of you have ever started one of those Bible in a year things and you get through February, you get into February, you're like, oh my gosh, I'm halfway through Exodus. This is already getting tough, but I'm a Christian. I'm going to stick it out. And you finish off Exodus and you turn the corner, you get into Leviticus, and you're like, that's it. Bible reading's too hard. I'm out. I mean, it's kind of like a manual for priests, the Levites. Most of the laws are found at the end of Exodus into Leviticus. The book of Deuteronomy repeats a lot of them, but they're primarily about how people are supposed to relate to God. Really about a priesthood, a lot of them around the priesthood. The things like the tabernacle and the offering system, even the kinds of clothes the priests are supposed to wear. They were very vertically oriented. But what Jesus did when he moved it to two is that he elevated the horizontal elements of the ethic to parallel the vertical. He said the second is just like the first. It's of the same quality. And he pulls this little passage out of Leviticus 19 that talks about the priesthood loving their neighbor. And he says now everybody is a priest. It's not just the people of Levi's family. Everyone is to love their neighbor as themselves. This would have been very novel and unique to first century Jews. They all would have nodded in agreement with Deuteronomy 6. But when he pulls Leviticus 19 and puts those two together, we don't know of any other rabbi or teacher doing that. Saying that the way you treat people is equally important to the way that you relate to God. You cannot separate the two. And the evidence was there all along in the Old Testament ethic. But Jesus elevates and parallels the vertical and horizontal components. And he makes this simple command, a new command I give you, that you love one another. It's simpler, yet it's more demanding. The ethic of love is harder than the ethic of offering sacrifices. It's simple. Love one another. But it will require more of you. If I could rephrase it, I would say it this way. Jesus is telling them, as you are loved by me, so you will love like me. There is no separating the horizontal and vertical components. As you are loved by me, so you will love like me. And that's how the world will know you're a Christian. As you are loved by me, so you will love like me. And that's how the world will know you're a Christian. What does this love look like? He tells us a little bit later in the meal. Chapter 15, verse 12, Jesus says, this is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. And then he says this, greater love has no one than this, that someone lay down his life for his friends. Have you guys ever seen the movie Inside Out? It's super good. Kid movie for sure, but so much more complex than kids even are grasping right now. But it kind of takes us a look into like the inner world of a tween-age girl. And she has all these characters living inside of her head. And there's this scene in Inside Out where she gets in and she has a crush because she's a teenage girl. And there's this boy with swoopy hair, and he's kind of in her mind, right? She's imagining him. And he tells her, he's like, I would die for you, Riley. So in her mind, she's like imagining the heartthrob, right? Who would offer himself for her. He would give everything for Riley. And what happens in the midst of the characters is this kind of malfunction, and they pull on this lever, and all of a sudden this guy keeps getting repeated. I would die for you, Riley. 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 I would die for you. And there they are, and they're kind of looking at this other part of her mind that they have to get to, and they need to traverse this great chasm. And what happens is they end up linking together all of these heartthrobs, and they use it like a catapult, and they swing it, and say, I would die for you, Riley. And they get to the other side, crisis averted, problem solved, right? I think deep down in our soul, all of us long to be loved this way. To know that someone would die for us. That they would offer themselves on our behalf. We all long to be loved like that. And I think every Christian is like a little link and the Christ-like chain that reminds us that we sacrifice ourselves for the good of others. Greater love, Jesus says, it's megas love. It is the ultimate expression of love that someone would lay down, that someone would offer, that someone would put their breath, their soul, their psyche on the table. Greater love. There is no greater love than that type of sacrifice, to give our very breath and soul for our friends. Our friends. It's the idea of familiar associates, companions. Friends like this would have been the picture in Jesus' day of a bridal party. The people who would have gone, the groomsmen who would have gone to the house of the proposed bride and offered the terms of the covenant of the marriage, who would have prepared and put together all of the festivities so that the groom and bride could celebrate their union together, who would have stood with the groom through the celebration of the nuptials and would have been present in the marriage itself. It was a very communal thing, far different from what we do with marriage in our day and age. Jesus says, there is no greater love than to offer everything on behalf of your friends. And then in verse 13, verse 35, it's kind of this interesting thing that Jesus comes back around this commandment. He says, I've given you this, all people are going to know that you're my disciples if you have love for one another. And if you're not paying attention to the language, then you don't necessarily notice this commandment, which was given in the form of an imperative verb, has now turned into an object. It's a noun. You will have love for one another. Because this is what the Christian ethic does in our soul. True love verbs until it nouns. It doesn't noun itself into a verb. Jesus didn't say, hey, if you guys have love for each other, then you'll lay down your lives for each other. He puts the verb first. You will love one another. And in choosing that, in entering that practice, that ethic, in embracing this command, you will grow in love for one another. You will love until you have love. Now we get this way backwards, right? Like, we only love what we already love. We don't really need to expound much on that, right? Like, you don't love what you don't love. It's why Jesus' stuff was so countercultural. He said, love your enemies. Nah. At the table, they said, yeah, they were friends, they were close companions, but this group would not have stuck together once Jesus was gone. They got issues. They have drama. They're men. Jesus knew his most critical moments required the ultimate command. You guys, love until you have love for one another. Anybody who's been married or parented gets this. Me, I do not always have love for the people I care most about. Let alone the people I barely care about. Let alone the people I don't care about. But Jesus says love everybody always. That was what verse 35 said. By this, all people, the whole world, will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. Now this is tricky. This is where the PR stuff comes in, right? Like, Christians, the world will know Christians by love, not by doctrine. The world will know Christians by love. Long before there were any seminaries or creeds, there was a community of Christ followers. Long before there was a written book called the Bible, there was a community of Christ followers. Long before we had arguments over whether or not this was inerrant, authoritative, or whatnot, there were people who loved the world. Long before we had wars over baptism, long before Irish and Catholics in Ireland Irish Catholics and Protestants were killing each other over doctrine, There was a community built by love. Long before there were millennial, all-millennial, post-millennial, pre-millennial positions, there was a community built by love. Long before there was charismatic expression and denominations abound, there was a community built in love. We argue with one another over who is orthodox, who has the right thinking, to the detriment of our own publicity. Denominations divide. And once those lines are written, wars are fought. And the world is confused. What is a Christian? The world will know Christians by love, not by doctrine, not by ethics. Not by all the things we call orthopraxy, all the right practices. The rules you enforce. Jesus at that moment could have created a supernatural rule book and just left it on the table and been like, hey, guys, this is it. Everything that anybody ever will need to know about what to do and how to behave is right here. Here's all the rules you need to follow. You had 613 before, here's 6,300. I don't know, there could have been so many more things. But Jesus wasn't interested in delivering a rule book to them that day. In those moments, he told them, the world will know you by your love, not by your ethics, not by your behaviors, not by all the things people will argue about to the detriment of the gospel. Can you cohabitate and still be a Christian? Can you be a Christian and not give 10%? Can you be a Christian and not read your Bible every day? Can you be a Christian and not volunteer at your church or in your community? Can you be a Christian and not swear? Do you have to not swear to be a Christian? Jesus didn't give us any of those rules when Judas left the door. He said, the world will know you by your love, not by whether you say God bless you when somebody sneezes. I thought we were going to have a sneeze there. I thought that was on cue. I was like, no. Ethics. We get so focused on behavior modification systems. We become unloving. The world will know Christians by love, not by doctrine, not by ethics, not by politics. What's the right way of organizing society? I think we forget, the gospel landed in the midst of an empire. There was a literal emperor at that time. The world was governed by monarchies. Democracy was a relatively new idea. The Greeks had kind of brought forward this thing and thought, hey, maybe people should have a vote in how things go. But it did not take it off. The Roman Republic was in its infancy at the time Jesus walked the earth. I don't think that Jesus is as concerned with the way we organize society as we are. He's like, oh, you got a king? Awesome. You got a queen? Great. Oh, you have a democracy? Good. You have a republic? Whatever. You have a democratic republic? Cool. America, you are like a tiny little baby. Only a couple hundred years old, and you're still amending the things that constitute your order. I just don't think that Jesus, in that moment, was interested in delivering them an agenda for how to collude with Rome. Hey guys, listen up. This is going to be dangerous. I'm about to die on a Roman cross, but in the future, this is how you'll get along with the Roman Empire. I think part of our PR problem today is that we've lost sight of the ultimate command. And we've given ourselves over to these lesser things: doctrine, ethics, politics. Like, what does this mean at City Coast? Because you're like, oh shoot, I'm already in this chair, Charlie. Maybe this was not what I was thinking it was going to be. When we talk about doctrine, we talk about orthodoxy here, I think like we kind of get put in that non-denominational category. I kind of reject that. I think of us as multi-denominational. We have the entirety of the Christian experience at our disposal to grow our faith with. We're not bound by an adjective. We have access to all Christians. There's a group called Renovare. They talk about the 6 primary streams of Christian spirituality that all feed into this oceanic thing that is the Christian faith. We'll swim and dive in and out of every one of those streams, which is why I think it's so beautiful for me to see when people share their story at City Coast and we hear all the different experiences that they've had. We can celebrate Catholic and Protestant upbringings. We can celebrate Methodism and Presbyterianism. We can celebrate whatever it is that God has used in your life to lead you up to this point today. We can celebrate all that is good and holy and beautiful in the entirety of the Christian experience because we are multi-denominational. We love the diversity of the church. And we're not interested in arguing with those who believe differently. Now, because of that, many would look at us and be like, well, you're unorthodox. I'm fine with that. Jesus said we would be known by our love, not our doctrine. Well, what about the ethics at City Coast? Don't we have Charlie, how come you don't tell us what we ought to do all the time? I think Christians are really good at shooting all over one another. You should. You guys, I have zipped my lips so many times with you. Just like I do with so many people. You should, you ought, you must. Those are dangerous words. We try to love one another toward life instead of oughting one another to death. I do think it's good. Some of you are like, man, I feel like I just have to read my Bible. I'm like, you know what? If you feel that, it's probably good to do that. It could be helpful in growing your faith. Everything we do with regards to ethics around here is an invitation to life and life in the full. We believe that as you get closer to Jesus through a variety of means, you will come to live a more full life. But you won't hear a lot of shoulds and oughts around City Coast. What about politics? Here we go, 2024 coming up. I just want you to get this is ahead of time, okay? So we're at the early stages here. Every week we gather around a table. And I guarantee you that people at that table voted differently than you and will vote differently than you this year. But what this table affirms is that we are citizens of a kingdom that Jesus himself said to a Roman prefect was not of this world. I think you should be engaged this year in the way that you think our society needs to be organized at this point in human history. You should be fully engaged. It's our privilege as citizens to do that. But every week we're going to come to a table that reminds us of where our eternal citizenship is. A table that affirms a kingdom that is not of this world. When Jesus looked at Pilate and Pilate said, "Are you a king?" Jesus said, "My kingdom is not of this world." That was enough for Pilate to go, this guy thinks he's a king. But I think it was an encouragement to all of us later on in this movement who would be tempted to think that the world should be organized the same way the kingdom is. I think Jesus looks out at those flags and he's like, those are cute. They're like patches on a Girl Scout vest. Now I love ours. So blessed, so privileged. But it's not my ultimate home. love will extend the table throughout the whole world. Love will give you family under every one of those flags. Love will give you brothers and sisters in every kind of church. Love will bind you together even with those who practice different behaviors than you. What if a faith community was established on the ethic of love? Like from the beginning, this was the most important thing. What would that look like practically? What does that look like practically around City Coast? There's an Anabaptist missiologist, a Mennonite missiologist named Alan Creeder, who talked about how if you take kind of the main expressions of the church, Catholicism and Protestantism, he said, and you take these 3 B's, this idea of belief and behavior and belonging, he says what you really get in the Catholic Church is the priority of behavior. There are things you do. They're the right way to do them. That's how you go about it. And those things reflect the things you believe. And if you behave this way and believe these things, you belong within this community. You'll feel that sense of security and belonging with it. He said Protestants just kind of shuffled around the first two. The Protestants like, no. It's all about what you believe. You got to get the right thinking in mind, and that will then shape your behaviors. And once you believe and behave accordingly, then you'll belong. And the Anabaptists, the Mennonites, the Quakers, they said, no. Jesus first created a space of belonging. And in that, he cultivated the opportunities. He created the space for people to believe that he was the Christ. And their behaviors came out of that. If you look at what the disciples experienced with Jesus, first and foremost, when they were with him, they experienced love. A sense of belonging. We're safe with him. And as he taught them who he was, as he shared himself with them, they came to believe that he was the Christ. And in the midst of this, Jesus didn't download every single behavior they were going to need to know right then and there. He doesn't even do that. I mean, the Sermon on the Mount might be the most extensive teaching we get with Jesus' ethic for life in it, but even that isn't comprehensive. Jesus says, you're going to learn to behave out of this, because I think, and this is what we talk a lot about within City Coast, we kind of replaced that 3rd B with the idea of becoming. You belong to God. You're given the opportunity to believe in him and to become like him, to embody his presence in the world. The very thing that Jesus did with the disciples went on to do with the world. They created spaces of belonging by leading with the ethic of love. And in that space, people came to believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And they became embodiments of Christ's presence in the world. I don't think that Jesus needs a new PR campaign. I don't think he does, because proximity trumps publicity. I want you to think about the people you care most about, the people you know, the people who are in your world. And I want you to envision them, late on Friday night or Saturday night or whatever it is, and they're sitting there at their iPad, or they're turning it into the news, or they're sitting there scrolling on their phone or something, they're looking through their media sources, and there it is. There's all the negative stuff about Christians. There's, oh man, these Christians are fighting with each other again. Oh, there's Christians again fighting with people again. Oh man, there's another Christian that's fallen from grace. There's another scandal with regards to sex and drugs. Oh man, look at the institutional racism and sexism and capitalism that just runs rampant through this Christian church. The person's just sitting there and they're scrolling away, and they're scrolling away, and they're scrolling away, and they're looking at all this stuff. And then they have this just like epiphany of like, wait a minute though. Wait. That's not like the Christians I know. I know Mike. I know Brooke. I know Carrie and Bill. I know Nicole. They're nothing like this. What if the people we were closest to knew the ethic of love so thoroughly in us that it didn't matter what they saw on their screens? What if as they were looking through all that negative media, the thought that kept circling through their head was, no. Christians love everybody, always.